I'm gonna echo. I'ma need you to back up. I'ma need you to back up. Yep. I'ma need you to back up. Spilling the tea, you stirring the cup. I'ma need you to back up. I'ma need you to back up. Yep.
Hey, welcome to Disrupt. This is episode 11 of this. We haven't done this in a while. My name is Jason Schwab. I'm a producer at RestaurantSpaces. And we have a really wonderful guest to bring on today. And we're going to jump straight into that right now. Our guest today is Meredith Sandland. She is an author and a speaker. But before that, she was the Chief Development Officer at Taco Bell. And more recently, she was also the Chief Operations Officer at Kitchen United. She spoke at our event in 2018. And that was kind of at the start of everyone figuring out what a ghost kitchen even was. So 3 years on, really happy to have her with us today. She's since written a book, which we're going to hear more about as well. So yeah, let's do it. Let's bring Meredith on live right now. Hello, Meredith. Are you there? Are you there?
I am. Good to see you, Jason.
I think, sorry, we're getting might be getting a little bit of echo. Do you hear that?
No, I'm good on my end.
Okay, it might be my imagination, but look, welcome to Disrupt today. Like I mentioned before, you know, we've had you speak at RestaurantSpaces in the past. That was way back in 2018. So why don't you tell us what you've been up to and what's happened since then?
Yeah, sure. Wow. That was a very long time ago. And you're right. It was just when people were figuring out what ghost kitchens were. I remember telling folks at Yum that I was going to a ghost kitchen startup, and the response was primarily, what? And now, you know, it's a burgeoning space that's had a ton of investment poured into it. And most restaurants have at least experimented with it, if not made announcements that that's going to be a major growth path for them going forward. So a lot has changed in 3 short years. In particular, we decided that we would write this book to help everyone understand what is changing. The disruption that's occurring is as big, I think, as what occurred in retail starting 20 years ago. And there's a lot going on. And I think when you hear the news and sound bites out there about ghost kitchens and virtual brands and all the things going on, it's hard to piece it all together. So that's what the book was for. And who could have ever predicted that the last year would turn out to be the craziest year for the restaurant industry? When we started writing the book in February of 2020, nobody knew that we were going to have all these shutdowns and that the internet was going to become the primary way that restaurants communicated with their consumers.
Yeah, so, I mean, really great. Look, let's bring up a shot of your book there on the screen, if we can do that. It says actually your book's, Meredith, it's coming out tomorrow, right? Is that the truth? That's what's happening?
Yeah, yeah. So it is available through our publisher on the website that you just showed there. It's available as an ebook already on Amazon, and then for pre-order as a hard copy on Amazon. It, for some reason, takes Amazon about 2 months to work it through their system, which I find fascinating. As much as they have disrupted retail, apparently warehousing still takes a little time.
Yeah, okay. Well, really exciting stuff. And we'll put a link up in the chat just on the right over here if you want to head to Amazon and have a read of that. Delivering the Digital Restaurant. I like to play on words there, by the way. So Meredith, why don't you talk us through, you know, who are you speaking to and what did you find out in this process putting this together?
Yeah, we got to interview about 100 different people for the book, which was an amazing experience because there are so many people doing innovative and creative things in the restaurant space. Whether they're actual restaurateurs changing the definition of what a restaurant is like, or technology providers trying to help restaurants become more digital, or prop tech companies like Kitchen United who are doing ghost kitchen things to support this shift to more omni-channel retail. So it's fascinating to hear their stories, hear how they're changing the world of restaurants and what they're doing. I think that you know, some of the most interesting people that we talked to actually started this innovation journey 20 years ago, right? They were the early pioneers in things like delivery. Others have just started their companies and are making a mark now doing the most advanced analytics and algorithms to help restaurants market themselves better to consumers.
Okay. And look, you mentioned, some of the work that others have been doing, or some came on to sort of adapting what they do early on in the piece. When last year happened, and the pandemic hit us, there were a lot of brands that, just accelerated what they were doing. We've heard that word acceleration a lot over the last year, but then, there were other brands that kind of went, holy shit, and threw their hands up in the air and then jumped into the bandwagon.
Yeah.
And so, where are we at right now with this? Through the pandemic, we saw off-premise jump up as much as 60, 70, 80, 90% for brands. We're still not sure how that's going to level out right now. So how do you think the next 12 months is going to play out for the restaurant industry?
Yeah, so I agree with you. Absolutely, the pandemic accelerated a shift that was already underway. Prior to the pandemic, digital delivery, excluding pizza and Chinese, was less than 10% of total restaurant industry sales. The pandemic absolutely made that jump up, in part just because there were no dine-in sales to compete with. The National Restaurant Association has estimated that the industry probably shrank by about 25% last year. All of that was dining going away, being replaced by off-premise takeout delivery. Obviously, catering got just cratered last year because many of the offices were shut down. Now, as you start to see our economy rebuild and reform, I think what you'll see happen is that people are not going to forget this off-premise behavior that they've learned during the pandemic. They will continue to do it. They might do it slightly less often than they were doing at the height of the pandemic as they substitute back in dine-in behavior. But they're not going to forget doing it entirely. They're not going to delete the apps. They're not going to say, oh, I don't need this anymore. I'm going back to dine-in. They're going to remember, wow, this is way more convenient than going grocery shopping and doing dishes. And you're going to see this delivery behavior continue. Internationally, which we interviewed quite a few folks internationally for the book, because those markets are more developed than the US on digital delivery. Internationally, you see delivery penetration as a percentage of restaurant sales between 30 and 70%. So I would imagine that the US will probably settle out long-term somewhere between 30 and 50%.
Right. Okay. Why is there that kind of lag between what's happening internationally and what's happening in the United States? I think I saw some data the other day that I think it's like 8% we've leveled out at the moment. So it's still, if you look at it in terms of growth, we're still at that hockey stick. We're still a long way to go. So
I know it's hard to believe after everything we've been through in the last year. It feels like we're done. But no, I think we still have a long way to go. And there's a lot of reasons that the United States is behind where the rest of the world is. Some of it is literally just the cost of labor, right? When labor is cheaper, it's much easier to deliver things and run a low-cost logistics network. So countries that have lower labor costs, you'll see tend to be much further along the curve than we are. Another thing that is very different, in particular between developing countries and the US, is that here in the US, we have a huge installed base of restaurants. We have over 600,000 restaurants. We probably have as many as 1 million kitchens when you include commercial kitchens of various sorts. In developing nations, they don't have that infrastructure. No one has built out all those restaurants yet. And so for them to skip directly toward a ghost kitchen environment or a commissary kitchen environment, putting out virtual brands via delivery just makes a lot more sense. And they are able in many ways to do that at a lower cost than it would be to dine in. And so you see the consumer then skip directly ahead toward delivery. And then the final reason is technology-wise, I think there are many countries, China being a prime example, where the behavior of ordering things online and getting them delivered is just much more ingrained in the consumer. And so porting that behavior from other categories over to restaurants is much easier.
Okay. And look, I just want to say to the audience quickly, we've got a wealth of knowledge in front of you right here. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and then we'll do our best to throw them at Meredith before the end of this. But just focusing on the US market there and what you just said about delivery in overseas markets, Meredith, how do you see it playing out here with, it's a pretty volatile market at the moment. There's a lot of different players. How do you see that leveling out over the next sort of 2 to 3 years?
In terms of the delivery platforms themselves?
Yeah.
So internationally, you really only see two major players in every market when they become mature. So I would expect that the US will probably get to a point where they have two major players as well. I think it remains to be seen who those major players are and what kind of consolidation you'll have over time. But it is very, very rare to have more than two. And that's true, frankly, of any platform. If you look across verticals, whether it be travel, or if you think of like Uber and Lyft here in the US with rideshare, it's just very, very unusual to have more than two major platforms. So I would expect consolidation down to two.
Okay. Let's shift to what restaurant brands should be focusing on right now. Everything in terms of what you've been saying, especially from a brick and mortar development perspective. What are the main things that brands should really be focusing on right now from what you're seeing?
Yeah, certainly making off-premise easier. And I think there's been huge improvement in this since I talked at RestaurantSpaces in 2018, just looking around at the restaurants that are out there and the places that I go. You've seen speeds in drive-thrus get a lot faster. You've seen more clear signage about what to do and how to do it if you are doing a mobile order pickup. It is much a cleaner experience for both drivers and consumers doing pickup in store to find their item and figure out where to go. I think there'll continue to be innovation on those fronts, whether it be moving from shelves to a locker-based system or having a separate drive-through lane for delivery drivers. You can imagine all kinds of things happening over time, but it's already gotten much, much better than it was. I think in 2018, restaurants very much felt like all of this was happening to them. And now I think restaurants feel a little bit more in the driver's seat, where they realize that the consumer is the one who's changing, and the consumer demands are changing. And the platforms, the technology is but a way to enable the consumers to get what they want. And now the restaurants need to figure out, how to drive that consumer to first-party ordering, and then how to fulfill that order as seamlessly as they can.
Yeah, that's a really important shift you mentioned there. It's like, when chaos happens in our lives, it sends a firecracker up us to really sort of get going. And that's things happening to restaurants. And now what we've seen over the last year is really fascinating. I remember when we talked in 2018, you said the driveway has, the drive-through has not changed for 60, 70 years. It's the same essentially. And now we're seeing all these crazy developments. So in terms of crazy developments or what restaurants are doing, Meredith, then let's focus on back of house and speed of service and efficiency. It became really apparent really quickly that, in order to sort of serve all the demand coming through these digital channels, you got to be working better in the kitchen. So what are the opportunities in back of house from, whether it's an employee experience perspective or the technology or the equipment that's being used in the kitchen? I'm still hearing reports of some brands using multiple tablets and haven't got an order.
I don't know what they're thinking. They got to stop that. It's too hard. It is too hard on the team to be managing multiple tablets. And one of my favorite restaurants here locally that we frequent quite often, they have multiple tablets. And every time I go in there, I'm like, oh, like the poor team. So there are several things happening that have nothing to do with restaurant design that are happening because of the consumer that are going to end up affecting restaurant design very deeply. One is as things shift to this omni-channel world, figuring out how to best service each channel, to your point, in a very quick way is going to be hugely important. The second is as virtual brands become more common, figuring out how to integrate them into the kitchen. And then the third is labor, right? With such a labor shortage out there, figuring out how to be as efficient with labor as possible ultimately comes down to the kitchen design in a lot of ways, and understanding the interactions between the equipment, the space planning, and the people is going to be critical. So taking each one of those in turn, if you will, on the first one, that omni-channel service, we tell a story in the book about drive-throughs when they were really, really early versus where they are now. And the first drive-throughs, I don't know if you've seen any of these, I have in our old Taco Bell Mission stores. They were literally just a window stuck on the side of the building. And, they were slow, the cars pulled up, they were more novel than anything else. And if you think of the difference between a window stuck on the side of the building, which is what they were in the, say, the 60s, versus today, where you have a separate production line for in-store versus drive-through. You have all kinds of science around how long the stack should be in between the order point and the pickup point. So many things going on that really required industrial engineers to figure out and perfect. That's kind of where we are with digital ordering. And we're back at that window stuck on the side of the building phase, right? Where I think a lot of brands think, oh, well, it's 5-10% of my sales. I can just sort of, service it as needed and stick it on there. But over time, remember, drive-through now is like 70% of many brand sales. And in order to make that happen and make that change work, both for the drive-through customer and the remaining dine-in customer, which is still a very significant business, you really have to design an experience for each one. And you see this in retail, for example. If you go into a Nordstrom and you're one consumer, sometimes you shop online, sometimes you shop in store, sometimes you shop online and return in store, sometimes you shop online and pick up in store, but they've now redesigned the store to facilitate all those different journeys. Something very similar will happen in restaurants, and the restaurants that are furthest along on their digital journeys, you're already starting to see it. So a really good example would be someone like Starbucks, who has a significant portion of their sales coming through digitally. And so they really think through, okay, what's it going to be like if you're a consumer walking in and placing an order versus if you're someone doing a mobile order pickup. And in super busy stores, they actually have the same thing as a drive-through, 2 production lines to service those folks who have ordered ahead versus those folks who are dining in, to make sure that they're both getting the best experience possible. And that is going to be a big change, I think, for restaurants as they think through the design, in particular, of that back of house. Similarly, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was just adding in noise.
Similarly, I think that integrating the virtual brands is going to fall heavily on restaurant design folks. I think there'll be a lot of fun marketing ideas of new product launches and brand launches that the marketing team wants to do, but figuring out how to bring that to life in the back of house in a way that doesn't completely muff up the underlying brand is a tricky thing, right? And certainly it requires as many shared ingredients as possible, possibly different day parts so that you can service the different brands at different times. But it also requires, if you can, as much shared equipment as possible and a similar cooking process. If you've got one process that is a prep and assemble process and another one that is, say, a scratch cooking process, those two things can't live very well in the same kitchen. It's very hard to execute both of them very quickly and very accurately and at high quality. And so figuring out how to design those brands so that they make use of as many commonalities as possible, and that engineering mindset is at the table with the brand people as they're coming up with ideas, is going to be critical.
Awesome, thank you. And you covered a lot in that, many different aspects of how the kitchen is changing. And that relates to an audience question we just had through from Richard Young from the Food Service Technology Center. And he asked, how is the shift to delivery changing kitchens, which you just answered. And second part to his question, when will ghost kitchens and delivery become profitable?
Very good question. So there are actually a couple of ghost kitchens out there who have figured out models that make money for both the restaurant operators as well as the ghost kitchen themselves. They are rather few and far between. I think there's still a lot of experimentation going on in the market. My belief when I was at Kitchen United, and the reason that we designed Kitchen United the way that we did, is that there are many different forms of off-premise consumption, and delivery is but one of them. The consumer today in America does take out quite a bit, or what I would call self-delivery, where they are picking up the product and taking it somewhere else to consume. And I think that that is critical to weave into a ghost kitchen environment. Catering is also huge, at least prior to last year, and I think will come back as folks start to go back into offices. And so in order to make a ghost kitchen viable for both the operator and the ghost kitchen itself, I think you really have to have multiple streams to make that work, going out through multiple occasions, if you will. I also think that the more brands that you can operate inside of a ghost kitchen, the more profitable you are. So when I think of some of the ghost kitchens that are doing better, they have many brands in the same kitchen, whether they are vertically integrated and they are operating those brands themselves, or if it's someone like a Kitchen United that's hosting someone else, they might be operating 3 or 6 or 8 different brands inside of a kitchen. And that helps a lot as well.
Okay. I mean, again, that's another, then you said there's a lot of experimentation, and it's a kind of a bit of a volatile segment right now. If you were to put your money on any kind of kitchen provider right now in terms of market share, what would you, I don't know if you want to say, but who would you bet on?
Who would I bet on in terms of the ghost kitchen players? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I'm obviously biased toward the Kitchen United model since I helped create it, and I think that they're going to do very well. I think Epic Kitchens is a fantastic version of ghost kitchens out there, and they operate on behalf of the brands that go into their kitchens. I think Cluster Trek is a fantastic model, and they actually are completely vertically integrated, where they have the ordering platform, they employ the drivers, they create all the brands, they execute the food, everything in one. It's a much more similar to what you see in China. In terms of how ghost kitchens are executed. I think they're great. But obviously Cloud Kitchens and Reef have a ton of money behind them. Having Travis Kalanick and having SoftBank helping you is always a good place to be. So that money, I think, will give them a long runway to help figure out what the right model is.
How nice to have a Travis Kalanick or in your back pocket, right? That's what a handy thing to have. Look, Meredith, there's something I want to clear up with you. Ghost kitchen, dark kitchen, virtual kitchen, partner kitchen, hybrid kitchen. There's too many names, Meredith. Too many names. What do you prefer, and what do you think's gonna stick into the future?
I don't know. Is there a good way to fix that? So the ghost kitchen name, we have never really liked, because there are actual people in it who are actually cooking, but I think it gives a very good, like, popular imagination to what it is. I would probably call it a dark kitchen, meaning that it doesn't have a front of house branded display. The virtual kitchen I find a little bit tricky because of the overlap with the name virtual restaurant. And a virtual restaurant can exist certainly inside a ghost or dark kitchen, but it can also exist inside what's called a host kitchen. I don't know if you've heard that one before, but a host kitchen would be a restaurant that's operating for some total other purpose, and then has another brand riding on top of it. So for example, a sushi restaurant that is a full sushi restaurant with a dine-in experience, but then serves poke out the back door. The sushi restaurant's the host kitchen, the poke restaurant's a virtual brand.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear? I don't know.
Not at all, but thank you anyway for trying. No, it's an evolving space, and who knows what's going to happen, especially as this virtual restaurant brand thing continues to evolve. Meredith, we don't have much time left, but another audience question just as we finish up. Do you see major chains slowing down their brick and mortar dining growth moving forward with the acceptance of ghost/host/virtual kitchens? I mean, there's news today that Wendy's has signed a 700-unit deal with Reef, for example. So, I mean, but there are limitations as well. So, I mean, how do you see that sort of playing out in restaurant real estate?
I think there are certain locations that make a ton of sense for a ghost kitchen execution. Those locations tend to be very, very densely populated and very difficult to get restaurant real estate. Those are going to be absolute no-brainers, even for the biggest brands, people like Wendy's, to put ghost kitchens into. I think there's going to be other places at the opposite end of the spectrum where maybe there's slightly less density, but what I would call a micro niche brand probably could not make a full restaurant expression economically pencil. So perhaps it's a brand that is more on the healthy end of the spectrum, or is vegan, and there just isn't as big of a target market for it. And if you were to try to put it in a less dense area, there just would not be enough demand to support the restaurant. But if you were to put it into a kitchen with 8 other brands, it'd probably be fine, right? So I think those two ends of the spectrum are probably where you'll see most of this kind of thing happen. I think the core bread and butter of the restaurant industry of, I've got 20,000 people within 2 miles and great traffic flowing by, I think you're going to continue to see full restaurant expressions being built.
Right. Meredith, look, we're just out of time, but I just want to throw you one last question. Given your track record and, being Chief Development Officer at Taco Bell for those years, this is a changing, rapidly changing, really liquid space, like everything in the world right now. A lot of cross-pollination having to happen between departments, like with marketing, for example. A lot of things that this role has never really seen before. So, I mean, in your mind, how do you see the role of restaurant development changing in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think historically, at least maybe for the last 30 years or so, from 1992 to 2007, which I call the great retail build out of America, where all of these multi-unit brands came from and really had their stamping out across the US. It was very much about, creating a model that replicated the same thing over and over and over again. And all of the systems in the US were aligned to reinforce that model. The way that restaurants were financed, the way that developments were put together, everything drove that engine. And in 2007, 2008, you might remember we had a real estate collapse, and all of that started to change. And I think the development departments across the US have become more creative because of that. They, certainly at Taco Bell, we had to figure out, how do we build in totally different environments? How do we do, an urban redevelopment? How do we do an urban inline? How do we build in a rural space, places that we hadn't built before? And opening up that creative muscle, I think has now set development departments up to really do more than just stamp out the exact same thing over and over again, to think through some of these creative problems and come up with creative solutions to them.
Yeah, I think everyone's minds have to move roughly 20 times quicker than they once did before. And Meredith, I know I said that was the last question, but we've had just one more audience question come through from Dustin at Kitchen United, actually. Dustin asks, there you go. Hi, Dustin. Look, will virtual brands become brick and mortars? Are we close to seeing these begin to pop up? And, of course, we are seeing that pop up already. I think Dickies, their wing concept has now they're sort of launching a brick and mortar location. So do you think that's something we'll start seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for anyone who's a student of what's occurred in CPG and apparel with direct-to-consumer brands, you think about things like The Honest Company or Warby Parker. These companies were born online. They are digitally native, but you do see them cross over. Honest is now available in Target. Warby Parker now has its own retail stores. And I do think you'll see the same thing happen with virtual restaurants, but I think they'll remain digitally native, just like Honest and Warby Parker have done. And those brick and mortar expressions, more than anything, are about customer acquisition and bringing them into that digital funnel and that process of working with the brand in a digital way, teaching consumers how to do it. That certainly can be profitable in their own right, but the purpose of them, I think, is slightly different. It's a little bit more of a flagship experience. You don't see Warby Parker build stores all across America. They're not trying to become LensCrafters or create a LensCrafters business. They're trying to share the experience of their brand and how to work with their brand in really key locations.
Whew, a lot of things to be excited about moving forward, and talking with you makes me realize that anything can happen, Meredith. Thank you for joining us on Disrupt today. And just one last time, I want to throw up an image here of your book, which you've co-authored with Carl Osborne. You can, again, hop to Amazon. We've got the link up in the chat there if you want to dig into the book, get some wonderful nuggets of wisdom. But Meredith, Thank you so much for joining us on Disrupt today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to see you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And, you know, Meredith is actually going to be at our physical in-person event as well, which we are running in October in Palm Springs, back in person again after a long time not being able to be with each other. So we're going to throw up a link in the chat as well if you want to go and request an invite to that. I know, I feel it. You want to talk to one another. Come along to Palm Springs and we'll do that finally. But before we head there, we're also getting the conversation started right now. We've been running mastermind roundtable sessions throughout this year. We have extended it a little bit more until early September because there's been so much demand for it. We'll throw up a link to that as well on the right. That's me when I had less hair. And you can go to sign up to one of those sessions, small roundtables, no more than 10 people, and you can talk candidly and truthfully about the things that you're going through right now. But hey, thanks for joining us on Disrupt. We're going to be back. Our next episode, episode 11, is going to be with Aaron Novoshin, who we were going to have on a previous episode a couple of weeks ago, but the technology gods didn't want that to happen. So we're going to be rescheduling that. We're talking with him in the near future. So head to the link that we're going to paste up in the chat so you can RSVP for that as well. But that's enough from me, from words falling out of my mouth today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time at one of our future experiences. Thanks so much.
I'm gonna need you to back up. I'ma need you to back up. Yep. I'ma need